colleagues, welcome to our session here. We're very happy to welcome you to the Triangulating Climate, Nature and Development through Integrated Finance session. It sounds rather complicated to me, this triangulation, but it's in essence a simple agenda, which is really how can we help ensure that we don't look at nature, climate, the SDGs, issues of equality and poverty in separation, because there could be a tendency to do that as the international process necessarily goes deep into each of those in separate processes. We have nationally determined contributions, we have national biodiversity strategies and action plans, we have the SDGs. All of these require country-level action as well as country engagement in an international process. But in reality, they obviously are inextricably intertwined and need to be looked at in an integrated way, because we don't have budgets for one separated from budgets for another, from another budget more broadly. Ministries of finance have to look at all of these issues together. And what is it that we can do as an international community to ensure that we are looking at them together? Again, if we look at the financial figures, we have commitments that were made in the UNFCCC COP around that $300 billion per annum. We have, I believe, commitments made in the Convention on Biological Diversification in Colombia last year, but I can't remember the number, 200 billion. We have a financing gap on the SDGs of something around 4 trillion a year. These numbers get floated around, but what do they really mean at the country level as we try with scarce resources to deliver on sustainable development for citizens? And that's really the topic that we're addressing in this discussion today. I should have introduced myself. I often fail to do that. My name is Tom Bilo. I'm the director of UNDP's Sustainable Finance Hub, but I'm the least important person in front of you, and we're really lucky to have an incredible panel who are going to enlighten us, I am sure, on this agenda. I'm going to introduce them as I ask them a question, just to save a bit of time. And I did promise in the previous discussion, and I'm going to commit to do better in this one, to finish 5 minutes early, because people need to go to the next meeting, which seems to happen, you know, as if by magic, to start at exactly the same time as the previous meeting finishes. And that's not possible, is it? So we're going to finish 5 minutes early, if not a little bit even before that. But let's get going. And I'm really pleased to be able to invite the permanent representative of Cabo Verde to the United Nations, Her Excellency Tania Serafim Yvonne Romualdo. I hope I didn't garble it too much.
That's fine.
Thank you for being kind. And here's my question to you. In light of Cabo Verde's experiences, how have integrated national financing frameworks facilitated the creation of financing strategies that do what we were just talking about, synergize climate action, nature preservation, and sustainable development? Over to you.
Okay. Thank you. Good morning, all. Happy St. Valentine's Day. Why not? So first, a word of appreciation for the invitation by UNDP, a very special partner to Cabo Verde's sustainable development, to participate at today's event. Cabo Verde is well on its way to recovery from a particular dire situation of debt distress, just after the worst phase of COVID pandemic and also the geopolitical crisis between 2020 and 2022, Cabo Verde's debt to GDP ratio was 160%. That was among the highest in the world. Despite these lingering challenges, the government of Cabo Verde demonstrated commitment, huge commitment, to address climate change and environmental sustainability with substantial financial investments, highlighting its dedication. The state budget for 2025, for example, clearly outlines several policy priorities that underscore these commitments. One of the centerpiece proposals is the establishment of a carbon tax in 2025, designed specifically to fund initiatives aimed at mitigating and adapting to climate change effects. Additionally, the government is set to introduce tax incentives to support the use of renewable energy in irrigated agriculture, enhance renewable energy production and microproduction, and the water desalination sector. There are further plans to facilitate the importation of animals, food, medicine, irrigation materials, greenhouse, food transport equipment, agricultural implements, with an eye to bolstering the sector's sustainability. At the same time, initiatives aimed at recycling and promoting alternatives to single-use plastic items are also being prioritized, not only in the rhetoric, but through the financial resources committed in the budget and expenditure frameworks. There's a holistic approach to governance and fiscal management, blending climate action and environmental stewardship with economic foresight. The measures I just mentioned are much more than just being ecologically sustainable. They were crafted towards the country's financial stability under the 2025 budget. The risk of debt distress is clearly diminishing, and the economy is projected to grow. The budget deficit is anticipated to narrow to minus 3.3% of the country GDP by the end of this year. Furthermore, forecasts by the World Bank also project a significant reduction in public debt, expected to decrease to 107 of the GDP. We do although recognize that public resources alone are not enough to achieve our strategic vision at the intersection of climate, nature, and development. The entire 2025 budget of Cabo Verde is projected at 900 million USD, with a revenue to GDP ratio at 20%. Correspondingly, the availability of public financing to address the urgent need for adaptation to climate change and regenerative nature remains circumscribed. Meanwhile, our new SDG-aligned strategic plan for development, sustainable development, in Portuguese it's called PETS because it's Programa Estratégico para o Desenvolvimento Sustentável. So there are the four letters, PETS, in Portuguese. It's our second one already. It was launched in 2023. It calls for the mobilization of 5 billion euro in public and private investment until 2027. And our 2021 NDC update also required an additional 2 billion until 2030. In short, the entire state budget would not be enough to achieve only, and of course this only, I don't mean it's not that much, sustainable development, biodiversity, and climate goals under the program that I already mentioned earlier. To create an enabling environment from bottom up, financing sustainable development during the pandemic and subsequent crisis, we implemented some innovative financial solutions. Since 2020, our Ambition 2030 strategy, supported by the UN and UNDP, identified blue and green economies as crucial for sustainable, nature regenerative, and climate-aligned development. This strategy emphasizes the importance of sustainable finance and human capital for achieving our long-term SDG and NDC goals. A key outcome was the development of the Blue X Sustainable Platform, finance platform, by the Cabo Verde Stock Exchange, and again, in very strong partnership with UNDP. The initiative creates a decentralized platform that aligns global, regional, and local impact investment supplies with the financing needs of sustainability, nature, and climate projects. In less than 2 years of operation, the platform has already supported the issuance and listing of 6 thematic bonds of the internationally recognized blue, green, social, and sustainable varieties, with a total investment now exceeding 40 million USD. The bonds are subject to alignment with both international standards as well as domestic taxonomies and regulations, as encapsulated in the Blue Bond Regulation published by our Capital Markets Regulation Authority. Last year, the platform received 2 Global Banking and Finance Awards and was distinguished as the most innovative initiative and recognized for issuing the best sustainability bond in the region of ECOWAS. These investments are now turned into sustainable and climate-cognizant actions through a diverse range of public and private sectors, from municipalities and microcredit agencies to shipping companies and public utilities, just to name a few. Our first sustainability bond listing, an issuance from a consortium of private companies supported by a public state guarantee, was designed to provide the financing necessary to invest in the greening of industrial buildings as a means of reducing carbon emissions and pollution. Our ongoing process underlines the importance of alignment. Financial strategies will only produce the desired impact when they integrate climate, nature, and development goals. Institutional coordination between all sectors and engagement by the private sector, which can be brought on board by market incentives, risk-sharing mechanisms, and financial innovation, are crucial. As part of our debt sustainability strategy, we initiated a bilateral swap with Portugal, converting debt into a climate and environment fund. This fund will support our renewable energy transition, aiming for net zero emissions by 2050. Encouraged by this model's success, we now aim to pursue similar debt for nature swaps with other creditors, leveraging their interest in fulfilling Paris Agreement and coming Montreal Global CBD framework commitments through credible financial reforms and actions. Cabo Verde has proven itself as a reliable partner in implementing climate and biodiversity objectives. Those include rapid scale-up in the renewable energy sector and, of course, as a big ocean state. After all, our geographic composition is 99.6% oceanic, only 0.4% is soil, developing a vibrant blue economy sector. With adequate technical and financial support from our partners, we envision the reduction of maritime sector emissions through non-fossil fuel bunkering services, as well as greening of shipping and other transportation services that will position Cabo Verde strategically and geographically as an attractive blue hub in the mid-Atlantic. As our Minister for the Ocean, or Seas, once remarked to our Minister of Finance, green in Cabo Verde is blue. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Ambassador, for running us through, really, I mean, almost every source of finance that one can align and leverage for sustainable development. You articulated how debt swaps, thematic bonds, stock exchange listings, tax incentives, budgets can all be used in concert towards an approach to sustainable development. And thanks also for articulating how in different country contexts, different elements of sustainable development are prioritized. And in your case, that wonderful thing at the end there, green is blue. So thank you so much, Ambassador. I'm really pleased now to turn to our next speaker, Director General of Global Affairs of the Republic of Mexico, Her Excellency Norma Salome Munguia Aldaracha. And again, we're going to turn now to the FFD4 process a little bit, if we can. And I just wanted to understand from your perspective how the outcomes of FFD4 could perhaps promote a stronger convergence across the finance for SDGs, NDCs, and NBSAPs, those three different acronyms. Over to you.
Thank you, Thomas, and very happy to share the table with these very interesting and important women, particularly for the development issues. And thank you. Now you are a minority. Well, as you know, Mexico is co-facilitating the process FFD4 together with Zambia, Nepal, and Norway. I want to emphasize the importance of having, you know, the global South represented, the global North. We qualify as global North, whatever that means, together with Norway. And as you can tell, it's countries from different regions. So we make sure that the document in the first, the zero draft is not charged to any of the regions. And also what's important for Mexico is to bridge among regions and the interests and the priorities for sustainable development goals. Regarding this particular issue on NDCs and MSAPs, well, we really believe this opportunity of FFD4 presents a unique and a critical moment to channel and to strengthen integration on sustainable development goals, NDCs, national biodiversity strategies and action plans, MSAPs. As we all know, climate change, biodiversity loss, and environmental degradation are interconnected crises. Very wisely, Ambassador Tanya said, green is blue, and it's true. All this degradation comes all together, and it should be attended in a holistic manner. Financial mechanisms to address these challenges often remain fragmented, limiting their effectiveness and accessibility, especially for developing countries. The zero draft of this FD4 outcome document underscores the urgent need to scale up financial resources for climate action and biodiversity conservation, while ensuring these efforts align with broader sustainable development objectives. Despite commitments under UNFCCC and the Convention on Biological Diversity, climate and biodiversity finance are not keeping pace with rising needs. To address these gaps, the international community must work towards a more coherent and integrated financial architecture. Mexico exemplifies the challenges and opportunities in bridging climate, biodiversity, and development finance. According to our National Institute of Statistics, INEGI, that's in the acronym in Spanish, environmental degradation costs the country 4.1% of GDP, while spending on environmental protection remains only at 0.7%. Additionally, the National Atlas of Vulnerability to Climate Change identifies 1,448 municipalities as highly vulnerable in Mexico, highlighting the need for enhanced resilient building efforts. To address these challenges, Mexico has prioritized transforming the international financial system to bridge gaps in climate financing. This includes strengthening synergies between development, climate, and environmental finance to facilitate the efficient allocation of public, private, social, and international resources. Mexico recognizes the need for a diversified and multi-sectoral approach, enabling developing countries to scale up climate financing to at least 1.3 trillion annually by 2035. Closing the 700 billion biodiversity financing gap by 2030 is also essential. Mexico NBSAP outlines multi-year financing strategies that focus on participatory governance, ecosystem restoration, and sustainable practices in key economic sectors such as agriculture, livestock, and fisheries. Given that a significant portion of Mexico's land is managed by communities and ejidos, which is some special kind of land tenure in Mexico, biodiversity conservation efforts must ensure that indigenous people and local communities whose traditional knowledge contributes to conservation have direct and equitable access to financing. As I said, as co-facilitators of the Zero Draft, we have worked to reflect the diverse perspectives of over 300 contributions. A consistent theme in these consultations has been the need to reduce inefficiencies, lower transaction costs, and ensure that financing frameworks align with national priorities rather than creating additional administrative burdens. The Zero Draft encourages efforts to harmonize multilateral and vertical climate and environmental funds, simplifying eligibility criteria, and remove access barriers for developing countries. It also recognizes the estimated costs of implementing NDCs in developing countries, ranging from 455 to 584 billion per year, and the need to improve the efficiency of international financial mechanisms to ensure that resources are equitable and mobilized. FFD4 can play a crucial role in enhancing policy coherence and integrating financial approaches that support SDGs, NDCs, and NBSAPs. By advancing innovative financial instruments, strengthening multilateral coordination, and ensuring inclusive and participatory financing mechanisms, FFD4 can help build a more equitable and effective international financial system. To conclude, these efforts will be key in supporting developing countries in achieving their climate, biodiversity, and sustainable development commitments, ensuring a resilient and more prosperous future for all. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Director General. I really was caught also in your remarks by many things, but the topic of maximizing effectiveness and maximizing effectiveness and maximizing efficiency are such core themes to discussions of finance for development right now in FFD4, and this agenda of bringing more integrated approaches to financing the intertwined policy objectives of climate, nature, and the SDGs, I think is really at the heart of that. Mobilizing finance in smart ways to deliver on these development outcomes. So thank you for highlighting all that work in Mexico in that regard. I'm now going to move to the right of me and also invite now the Ambassador for ECOSOC, Human Rights and Sustainable Development of Sweden, Her Excellency Charlotta Schleiter, to provide her remarks. And again, I've got a question for you, which is what steps can be taken to foster a more tangible cooperation at the country level around integrated financing strategies for climate action, biodiversity, nature, and the SDGs? And how can Sweden, especially CEDA, support these initiatives? Charlotta, over to you.
Thank you so much, Tom. And as you mentioned in the beginning, this kind of triangularity is complex. But I can tell you that my colleagues back at CEDA and also at the Foreign Ministry in Stockholm are very excited about this, and that's obviously why I'm here to represent Sweden. I just think also listening to the examples from Cabo Verde just makes it all very real, and I understand why this is a direction that Sweden is moving with our development cooperation. First of all, the INFFs, I think, has become such a good way of engaging with countries and finding out what the priorities are. It's an all-of-government approach. It's about budgets and bringing the NDCs, and obviously it's an important year, 2025, and the national biodiversity strategies and action plans together. Then you get the whole baseline also for tackling climate investments, because it's true, as has been mentioned, it's not all going to come from ODA or domestic resource mobilization. It's going to also require substantial private investments. So I just wanted also to say that we are moving actively to try and understand, and to your question, so CEDA is working with all our embassies around the world to encourage them to better engage with host governments to understand the INFF, NDC plans, and to be able to respond to governments where they're at. And it sounds like we are obviously is something we should be doing all the time as a donor, but it's also something that's been made easier by the use of INFFs and NDC collaboration. So this is something that is very exciting for us. I'd like to also mention we're a big donor to all major climate and our environmental funds. And so I'd like there to talk about the synergies about that they see while using sustainability targets and greater harmonization. And I'm going to botch this example, but I'm going to mention it. And it may make sense to others in the room. But if you look at the Global Environmental Facility, apparently, my colleagues say delivers 11 times of emission reductions, 11 times Sweden's annual emissions. And I assume our annual emissions are substantial. So, you know, it's I think that's, for a big donor, that's motivating, right? Yep. To come back, because it really is something that has been shown. And that can help them implement Paris Agreement and the Kunming-Montreal Agreement. Yeah, so for countries taking the lead in the green transition, these are immense possibilities to collaborate in the future, and we're on board. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ambassador, for being on board. And you're right, and you didn't botch it. That startling statistic of emissions reduction through the GEF programming being 11 times that of the emissions of Sweden is an incredibly motivating statistic. I'm going to turn now to Joanne Bauer, the co-founder of Rights Collab. And I do hope you're going to say a little bit about what Rights Collab is for some of us who are not so aware. But let me give you the question that I know that you know is coming. How can we engage the latent capabilities of the private sector and civil society to address intersectional challenges of that triumvirate of climate, nature, and development financing, while also tackling inequalities and ensuring more equitable access to finance for all communities in this collaborative effort? It's a long question, but I know that you know what it is.
Absolutely perfect teeing up of what I'd like to say. And I just want to say what a really, truly privilege this is to be here, because I'm going to be talking about a discussion paper that my organization just put out on tackling inequality in climate finance for a successful green transition. We have thoughts about this and some recommendations, and without wanting to sort of take over the entire panel, be certainly very keen to get the responses of these esteemed panelists. By way of introduction, I teach business and human rights at Columbia University at the School of International and Public Affairs, and in 2018, with two partners, founded Rights Collab. What is Rights Collab? And I don't expect a lot of people in the room to know. We are a very small organization, but we think of ourselves, we like to think of ourselves a little bit mighty. We like to develop kind of out-of-the-box solutions to human rights challenges that bridge the fields of business, finance, civil society, and technology. So count on me to bring the human rights perspective. But one example, I do want to mention that one example of kind of an out-of-the-box solution was that we incubated 5 years ago during the height of the pandemic the idea of a task force, like a task force on inequality equivalent to the TCFD, which has now happily, very proudly been launched very recently as the Task Force on Inequality and Social-Related Financial Disclosures. That is being, the Secretariat is being, the UNDP is the home to the Secretariat, and again, we're very, very proud of this development. On to the discussion paper on tackling inequality in climate finance. We would like to really introduce to all of those crises that the ambassador mentioned around climate, biodiversity loss, environmental destruction, the real importance of centering efforts to reduce inequality. So our paper speaks specifically to blended finance as a vital tool to bridge the climate finance gap for EMDs. So whereby MDB concessionary financing, of course, incentivizes private sector investment by subsidizing the cost of currency hedges or making first loss guarantees. But we also recognize that this massive transfer of risk is really transfer of risk from the private sector to the public sector, And that in itself, without guardrails, can exacerbate inequality. And we argue that blended finance schemes that are blind to their contribution to socioeconomic inequality can sow the seeds of disrupting green transition efforts and inadvertently set back progress toward a climate transformation. Or to put a more positive spin on it, addressing inequality can pave the way for a more successful green transition. So when we're thinking about integration, this is a plea to think about how we do that, and we have some ideas, so that's what I'm going to put forward. We're proposing a way for governments, development finance institutions, and asset owners working together to champion blended finance structures that embed the intention to tackle inequality, and in doing so can earn society's support for climate mitigation and adaptation while achieving climate goals and reducing this existential threat to the planet. Just a few words on why, if it's critical to reduce inequality, as what we see really is the only way to a successful green transition. The evidence is clear that the ultra-wealthy are the world's heaviest emitters. And since 1990, the poorest 50% of the world's population has been responsible for 16% of total emissions growth, but the top 1% has been responsible for 23%. And while per capita emissions from low and middle income groups within rich countries have declined since 1990, those of the global top 1% have actually risen. And such calls, of course, such imbalances have, of course, prompted calls led by Brazil for a climate wealth tax and imposing a 2% surcharge on billionaires' assets to be used for climate mitigation and poverty reduction in EMDE countries. But perhaps in the current political climate, the appetite for climate wealth tax has only weakened. Consider also that inequality in the form of institutionalized discrimination generates the conditions that allow high emissions to continue as socioeconomically marginalized communities become victims of what can be called sacrifice zones of very highly politically powerful entities who are polluting. So therefore, you could think that reducing inequality could increase the agency of disenfranchised groups to just say no, which would thereby raise the cost of emissions and incentivize polluters to accelerate their reduction. Socioeconomic inequality diminishes the effectiveness of climate change mitigation because it drives political polarization and mass protest. There was one study by INFF economist Davide Forcieri and his colleagues who found that political backlash to climate change policy only occurs when inequality is at a high level. So that one alone may be enough to make our case, but I will just add that there are plenty of studies. Rights Collab put out another paper with Oxfam last fall that documents all of this, demonstrating that inequality harms the economy by increasing the probability of financial crises and worsening other risks, such as food insecurity, pandemics, and other public health emergencies, such as antimicrobial resistance, and all of this saps resources that could otherwise be devoted to combating climate change. So our message to governments. Governments should enshrine commitments to reduce socioeconomic inequality within and between countries in their NDCs. And we make 4 specific recommendations on how to do this. Governments that fund MDBs, DFIs, need to genuinely commit to reducing socioeconomic inequality to accelerate climate progress and really use their leverage to better incorporate those considerations into the social and environmental frameworks of the MDBs. For their part, MDBs should channel blended finance opportunities to pension and sovereign wealth funds that will recycle the monetary returns back to society. We feel strongly that these opportunities should not go to the ultra-wealthy investors to profit off the low-carbon transition. In fact, we think this should be a clear guardrail, that ultra-wealthy investors should be banned from such opportunities. Moreover, MDBs should prioritize EMDE-based pension and sovereign wealth funds and diverse and emerging economy fund managers as beneficiaries of blended finance returns, therefore supporting financial system development in these regions and reduced inequality between countries. And finally, asset owners and MDBs should take measures to incentivize asset managers to build local EMDE capacity, supporting economic growth in these regions, and reforming investment practices that have historically exacerbated socioeconomic inequality. And just a couple more points, and then I'll stop. So beyond these financing considerations, MDBs have a little bit of work to do to put in place stronger measures to protect the rights of people affected by climate projects. So this includes consistent inclusion of community benefit sharing agreements that follow best practices, as well as inclusion of remedy frameworks into their transition finance policies and as part of their social and environmental frameworks. So for example, forestry, carbon offset, and other green transition projects that are located in the Global South too often divert financial returns to Global North entities while depriving local communities of adequate participation in the processes and the rewards, which then widens the gulf of inequality between developed and EMDE economies. Now, the World Bank has explored best practices for fair agreements between developers and local communities. There's, of course, the IFC Performance Standards 7 that advocates for fair and equitable sharing of benefits associated with project usage, specifically for indigenous peoples. But to date, the MDBs have not consistently provided for community participation in project design, nor community benefits agreements. And as for remedy, for green initiatives to move quickly, MDBs need to strengthen access to remedy for harms that occur even as a consequence of the climate transition finance. So even though, again, MDBs have in place the environmental and social frameworks to prevent harm and the redressal mechanisms, for example, the CAO of the World Bank, in practice, people harmed by MDB financing routinely face significant challenges in seeking remedy. Given this legacy, ensuring remedy is really critical. It's critical to reducing inequality, and having a stronger remedy framework can give MDB managers confidence that the organization has the tools to correct things if things go wrong, because they do sometimes. So again, environmental and social policies and accountability frameworks need strengthening to support a just transition. And I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Joanne. I think you've really helped round off a fantastic panel where we've heard around the country examples of, work in progress to bring INFF's integrated national financing frameworks together in ways that drive investment across these agendas of nature, climate, and the SDGs. We've heard around the FFD4 outcome document, the opportunities it might present us to bring international attention to the need for country support that brings these approaches together. We've heard a little bit about NDC ambition, and of course this year is not just FFD4, it's also the UNFCCC COP30 in Belém, where there's an opportunity to ensure that finally finance is linked to NDCs in a way that enables ambition to be scaled. We've heard from Sweden how the INFFs provide a platform, if you like, for that discussion at the country level through your embassies and otherwise on how to provide support that drives this more integrated approach. And finally, this fantastic evidence from research and the positions that, Joanne, you were putting forward on how inequality needs to be at the heart of NDCs, that NDCs are a vehicle both to reduce inequality, but also will be driven by a reduction in inequality because climate action cannot be taken forward without looking at issues of equity. So thank you to all our panelists. Now, this is the moment again, just as it was a couple of hours ago, when I'm going to open to the floor with some nervousness, because it is approaching lunch and people get a little bit sleepy before lunch. But I know you've been woken up and invigorated by these interventions from our panelists. So I'm just going to keep talking until some of you put your hands up and ask a question or have a suggestion. Phew. Over to you. Please introduce yourself.
Hello, good morning to you. Thank you. My name is Ana Rita Castro. I come from Portugal, the National Development Cooperation Agency. So I would like especially to congratulate the intervention of the distinguished permanent representative of Cabo Verde. As you said at the table, that this triangulation really can be difficult, but it's feasible and it's real, and we are very, I think we can say, very proud to be a part of that process. Just last week, in a bilateral meeting, Cabo Verde, Portugal, another memorandum of understanding for a new swap was signed. So that means that things are working. We are in a good path. This is for us as a donor country, a new situation. So with innovative mechanisms and the relation with our partner countries, but we are seeing it as a win-win situation for both parties. On one hand, in this case, we can build upon new strategies on development cooperation, and the paradigm of development cooperation is changing. And on the side of Cabo Verde, they rely on a new financial agreement, green and blue agreement. So this is working, and we are studying as well its extension to other partners, as São Tomé and Príncipe. So I will wrap up saying in Portuguese that estamos juntos, which means we are together.
Thank you very much for that. And it is really great to hear how the Portuguese National Development Cooperation Agency is engaging in these new instruments. And I know from my experience of working with development cooperation agencies, the FFD4 process is a real opportunity for others to learn from you and from CEDA, of course, to try out these new engagements on finance for development that are not purely grant-based instruments. And of course, that is absolutely essential to the scale of finance that countries like Cabo Verde and others need to take this agenda forward. So thank you for that intervention. I will be passing back momentarily, just warning, to the panelists, just for your own closing reflections. But before that, I see a question. Please introduce yourself.
Thank you very much. It's a very interesting sessions. Particularly, I would like to know more.
Can you introduce yourself as well, please?
Yeah.
Sorry.
I'm from Nepal, from Beyond Beijing Committee, and we work on women's rights. So I would like, since inequality, the main center, the inequality which is presented, it's very interesting. But I would like to know more little about what will be the strategies, additional strategy we should be taking to reduce inequality, gender inequality, to reduce inequality between women and men, which is prevailing all over the world in different dimension and in different degree. So I think if we don't focus the gender aspect of it, only reducing inequality may not really reduce inequality in real sense. So I would like to more reflection on that as well. Thank you very much.
No, thank you for that comment and question. Any other comments and questions? Please, over to you.
Hello, my name is Elizabeth. It's unrelated, is that okay? Yeah. My name is Elizabeth Aceituna, and I work with the World Wildlife Fund. My role is engaging with the financial sector, but I'm representing other colleagues here. It was very interesting to hear about what the different countries are doing. We are very much for this financing green, putting more money in debt for nature swaps and other nature-based solutions. We do that a lot, but I think what I failed to hear was what efforts were being made towards redirecting subsidies in certain productive activities like agriculture, etc., towards more sustainable ways of working. I always make the parallel with renewable energy that now is competitive because it was helped by incentives, subsidies, etc. So how can we work better towards doing the same in other areas that are affecting nature? And obviously, I don't mention this, but climate change and biodiversity laws are intertwined. So we all know here that we can't address one without addressing the other. So all solutions need to be integrated. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I have a question for Joanne.
And introduce yourself.
Christopher Lillyblad from UNDP. I work for Tom. For Joanne, I heard one of the recommendations was specifically on the profits from blended finance being reallocated. I was wondering if you could go into a little more detail about how that mechanism could be, or such mechanism could be put in place, or by what means that could be achieved. And then also in terms of discretion of the selection process for the potential beneficiaries of blended finance, how that would be operationalized without directly getting into the business of picking winners and losers.
Okay, colleagues, so last chance before... Yes, please.
National Center for Tax and Development. My colleague has recently done some research interviewing African policymakers on the issue of climate and environmental taxes. And something that really came through was that there's a real lack of data and the capacity to analyze climate, environmental, and fiscal data jointly. So that seems like a real challenge to address in order to move this agenda forward in a coherent manner. And the other big challenge was the fragmentation, even at the national level, between all the different ministries and agencies that deal with, like Ministry of Finance, but revenue, but also then environmental, tourism, mines, so there's so many, there's even competing mandates. So I wonder if the panel could say something maybe from Cabo Verde's experience about how you managed to really make this whole of government approach effective, and something perhaps also on what could be done in terms of jointly analyzing the data. Thank you.
Brilliant. Well, what a great set of questions. I'm not going to summarize them all. I know you were all listening intently, and I'm going to pass along the panel in the same order that we had our remarks provided at the beginning, if that's okay, Ambassador, to begin with you. And if I could ask you all to try and keep to 2-3 minutes max, so that we stick to that lunchtime deadline that I gave us at the beginning. So over to you, Ambassador.
Thank you, and thank you also for all the questions and or comments. Very quickly, Portugal, on the debt swap, yes, thank you for mentioning that important additional agreement just signed during the summit between our two countries held like 3-4 weeks ago now. Yes, it did set an example. I remember the signing with with São Tomé and Príncipe during a COP in Dubai. And as far as I know, that is also going well, and you are probably also going to add or step towards the next part of it. I would like to mention that many SIDS are having similar approaches. For example, Seychelles is doing very well with blue bonds. I remember during the CBD, the 15th in Montreal, SIDS launched an initiative which is SIDS Coalition for Nature, and it's also looking at any innovative financing for nature within SIDS. This is, as someone already underlined, very I mean, many processes are dealing with different aspects, but they somehow all end up to touch on these issues. Even the upcoming UNOC 3 in Nice next June, then later the year, the COP30, they will all look at innovative mechanisms, and of course the FFD, which will happen also in June. And thank you, Mexico, for bringing us some insights from someone who is really co-facilitating this very, very important process. The colleague from Nepal mentioned the issue of how to reduce gender inequality. And again, we are approaching CSW. This will be, again, of course, one of the topics. This is also the year we celebrate Beijing 30+. So gender is really on the agenda for all the good and also some less good reasons. At some national levels, we see many pushbacks. Not a good sign, but at least within the multilateral and the UN, we should try to keep the achievements and the wins that are already there, not go backwards, and try to step into the right direction. It's a fight, yes, but we need to keep also a positive spirit and look at the positive signs, and there are some. Although in general there's a lot of pushback in that field. I wanted to thank also Joanne for bringing the human rights perspective into the conversation and the need to leave no one behind in that field. Just a couple of months ago, there was, I don't remember during which of the processes, but there was a very interesting side event with UNICEF. And the main topic was how to guarantee that the social sector also receives enough funding when we are dealing with the achievement of the SDGs. Because you look at projects for renewable energy and so on, climate mitigation, but what about social security? What about children? What about education? We also need to look at that social aspect and the need to protect it, because there can be no development if we don't look at the people who will, at the end of the day, be the main beneficiaries of it. Alignment of the sectors. Yes, a very interesting question. In Cabo Verde, what did we do? I mentioned the PETs, the National Strategic Plan for Sustainable Development. It was prepared precisely because we felt the need to have the different sectors aligned. You cannot work in a very productive way. You will get there at some point, but you can make the way shorter if all the the sustainable development and nature and financing, it's the Ministry of Finance. It's, of course, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, number one, because that's my ministry. It's the Ministry of Environment. It's the Ministry of the Seas. And then again, it's also the minister that deals with the ministry, sorry, I said minister, but I meant ministries, for family and social inclusion, dealing with those aspects, which also is in charge of gender issues. But not only did we try to align all our sectors, because they are all working with that one main strategic plan. Then, of course, each sector will also have its own plan. But it's aligned with what UN is doing in Cape Verde. Cape Verde was the first example of a one UN office, and a very well-succeeded one, I must say, and of course with the constant support of the partners. And while we were working on the preparation of these PETs, we had a lot of technical support coming from the UN and in particular from UNDP. We also could count on the UN on its own side when they are working on their annual program for Cape Verde. If you look at both documents, there's a complete alignment. So this means the alignment is not only at national level, but also with our international partners. Because otherwise, of course, the final destination is the same, but if you are going on different paths, it might even be counterproductive. So in this case, maybe the size of the country makes it a little bit easier. We are talking about a small country with 500,000 residents. We have 1 million abroad, so. But in the country, it's about 500,000 people. So, of course, scale makes it a little bit easier to try to align all those strategies, both at national but also international level. And I don't want to speak more because I already went way behind the minutes I was giving.
Oh.
Thank you.
No, but thank you. And it's just incredibly helpful to bring the discussion to the country level and the practical examples you've given on the ways in which you're working to bring this together. So thank you so much, Ambassador, for giving us that example. I'm going to pass straight over now, if it's okay, to our Director General. Over to you.
Thank you. And thank you for the comments and the questions. And I'll speak on quickly on the two questions, comments from Nepal and WWF. The gender issues. In Mexico, we've moved towards affirmative actions. I know it's been contested. I know there are different opinions on how to deal with things. By the way, Mexico, the majority of the population now, it's female population. And, but still, we have those gender issues. So I'll give you one example. In the case of the agricultural area and particularly the rural areas, a lot of the land titles and property are issued to men. Not because of the law, I should say that, not because of the civil law it's written like that, but rather more like family inheritances and things like that, particularly in the indigenous communities and rural areas. So, and unfortunately, by different reasons, men are gone from the rural areas, and women, either older or younger, are the ones in charge now of the ag, not in the whole country, but in many areas. So the authorities have eased the requirements for acceding to or accessing to financing, and also recognizing who the owners or the property, because sometimes it's the wives, widows, daughters, and so we've gone on to that, and it has been very important, and particularly with indigenous communities. So, I mean, it's the kind of things that we've worked on, and as I said, many affirmative actions. And so far, it's what has worked. We still have a long way to go, but that's what, it has worked in the case of Mexico. So now regarding the, as you said, the negative subsidies and all this. Since the adoption of Agenda 2030 and when it was implemented and the decision was made in Mexico on how we were going to deal with it, we've done quite a few things. And I'll give you here the examples because I have them here written. The federal budget, which is annual federal budget, has been linked to the SDGs as they are written since 2018. And that's work that we've done with the Finance Ministry and, of course, Trade Ministry, and each ministry in charge of their own agenda. We've worked so we can have the actions on the future spending, as we said, labeled for the for the 2030 agenda. Now, what we've tried to ensure is medium long-term public spending aligns with sustainable priorities. And of course, we have to take into account transparency and accountability in all this. Also, there's been a sustainable finance mobilization strategy in 2023, sorry, and a roadmap of 19 lines of action and 97 activities to integrate sustainable principles into financial decision-making across key sectors. Also, since 2020, Mexico has issued sovereign SDG bonds and sustainable linked loans, where we have incorporated environment, social, and governance criteria. And the last one, which is very important, Mexico has issued a taxonomy, a sustainable taxonomy, and which is a classification system for sustainable investments, covering 124 activities across 6 strategic sectors. Future updates will include biodiversity, financial inclusion, and sustainable cities. So we've complemented all this with global biodiversity initiatives. We are working through BioFin, and we launched together with UNDP all this, and we've worked on this since 2015. So we are also engaged in the MEX 3030 project, which has to do with the national protected areas. So, I mean, it's a tremendous effort to put and to try and sit with the Finance Ministry. It's not an easy task, but I mean, it's the only way to do it. So, thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, not an easy task, but the only way to do it. I think that's a fantastic way to conclude your remarks. So thank you so much, Your Excellency. I'm now going to pass over to you, Charlotta, for your reflections.
Thank you, and in the interest of time, I'm just going to comment on a couple of things. Gender equality, very important point, and points have already been made by other panelists. But I'd like to say that overall, I mean, looking back at our own development journey, it's been about gender equality, and it's been about timely policy and legislation decisions that have made it possible for women also to join the workforce while still having a family life, and for men to move more into the family domain while still working. And I haven't heard anybody say, boy, I wish I wasn't so engaged in my family, or women to say, boy, I wish I weren't working. So I mean, it's not to say that all jobs are easy, but this seems to be matching the ambition of most human beings. And that's been about universal affordable childcare, quality such childcare, and about parental leave. And a couple of decades ago, there was also some parental leave being particularly assigned to the father. Only the father can take those months, and that was a watershed moment because men started taking the conversation at work. As you know, I have these months. They're for me only, and once I'm going to take these 2 months, why don't I take 5? So that's all. I'm a big believer in policy. Also in taxation, actually, because taxation was mentioned. Taxing families as a unit or taxing women and men separately as individuals had a big difference, and that reform is also a few decades old. So I wanted to mention that. Then, because consultations have been mentioned, and I didn't mention it, but of course, consultations in setting the INFFs, etc., with civil society, obviously, and with representatives of indigenous peoples, with persons with disabilities, LGBTI, etc. Such a given, really. And if I'm looking at our own processes when planning for a voluntary national review or national human rights action plans, nothing would have worked or have made sense if we hadn't properly consulted. And I think from our first processes to our subsequent processes, that has steadily improved, and it's really something that can be warmly recommended to others too. Thanks.
Thank you, Charlotte. Joanne, final points.
Yes, and I will. I'm going to try to preserve your 5 minutes. But Chris, in answer to your question, I mean, just to clarify, I think you know that this is we think blended finance is critical. It's absolutely critical, and what we're trying to do through this paper is to impress upon the community of thinkers around how do you get this climate finance to not forget this piece, because we could just run away with these opportunities and in the meantime exacerbate inequality, which is not going to get us to where we want to go. So we put this out as, and I'm sorry it sounds like I'm punting, but but we put this out specifically as a discussion paper to begin to get that conversation going. We put in as much details as we can about how to establish those guardrails. The first step is really to come to an agreement that this is important and that there should be those normative standards. Then how you get to, actually establishing and implementing those guardrails is another question. But I think if it becomes a normative standard that when countries are doing their nationally defined contributions, excuse me, that they're recognizing that they're able to sort of do some bullet points on, and we're doing this and this and this in the process to ensure that we're not, we're putting this inequality lens on what we're doing. That would be a great step forward. But what we really want to do is bring together people who are interested in this concept to get more granular about, how you actually get that done. So it sounds like I'm punting, but truly this is kind of where we are and what we're really trying to generate that conversation. I just can't resist, sorry, I must address the gender equality one as well before I stop. Another thing, kind of the out-of-the-box solution that we have been working on at Rights Collab is this idea of a pooled fund, pooling private sector contributions for people affected by land-based investments, communities affected by land-based investments, with an independent governance mechanism for this pooled fund to provide the resources for the technical and legal support so that they can engage on equal footing with the investors and have a better outcome. And we're specifically working right now in the area of climate credits and climate credit projects. And that's a project that will be piloted relatively soon, we think. We're forming a steering committee for that at the moment, and we see a lot of possibilities. And so we think, as part of the governance structure in there, that there would be a mindfulness about gender within the community and women being able to have a say in these projects. I think communities are, may actually welcome forestation projects, but too often these are happening without the involvement in the community, and there's always been this difficulty in how you get the money there to give them the technical and legal support to do that. So hopefully that can help to contribute.
Thank you so much, Joanne. Thank you so much, panelists. I've completely failed, as usual, to get those 5 minutes, but I think we might be able to get 1 minute, and I will preserve that for you by saying absolutely nothing. But thanks to all of the panelists, thanks to all of you for the discussion, and looking forward to taking this agenda forward in FFD4 and all those other international policy process that we've touched upon. Thank you very much.